The coffee was still brewing and the house still smelled of wood smoke when my mother slid a document across my grandmother's kitchen table and told me to sign it. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Grandma Eunice had died 6 days before on a Wednesday morning, in the same bedroom she'd lived in for 41 years. I had been the one holding her hand. I had driven 3 hours the night before in the dark because the hospice coordinator called and said it was time. Dana hadn't come until the following afternoon, once the arrangements were already made. My name is Callie. I was 34 years old, a hospice nurse working out of a care center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I had spent 11 years watching people leave this world, holding their hands, regulating my breathing so they could regulate theirs. My profession had taught me one thing above everything else. The quietest person in the room is usually the one paying the closest attention. I looked at the document my mother had placed in front of me. It was a single page. Typed. There was a line at the bottom with my name printed beneath it in small letters. Above that line, in language I had to read 3 times to understand, was a statement releasing any claim I had to my grandmother's estate, including personal property, savings accounts, and the house on Stillwater Road. I didn't pick it up. Dana was standing at the counter with her arms crossed. Roy was sitting across from me looking at his coffee mug. Neither of them had been in this kitchen before the funeral. I had been coming here every 3rd weekend for 6 years. We need this handled before the attorney gets involved and makes it complicated, my mother said. Eunice would have wanted it clean. Simple. Family takes care of family. Kept my face still. You're the reasonable one, Roy said without looking up. You've always been the reasonable one. I looked at the document again. Then I folded my hands on the table and waited. Callie. Dana's voice sharpened. This isn't the time to be difficult. We're grieving. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said very evenly, I'd like to read it first. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. There's nothing in there you need a lawyer for. It's just paperwork. I nodded. I set the document back exactly where she had placed it. I did not sign it. What I knew and what she did not yet know I knew, was that Grandma Eunice had already handled this. She had handled it 3 years ago in a lawyer's office in Hendersonville, on a Tuesday afternoon when I had driven her there myself. But that morning, 6 days after the funeral, with coffee going cold in front of me and wood smoke still threading through the curtains, I just folded my hands and waited. My grandmother's name was Eunice Prater. She had grown up the daughter of a tobacco farmer in Robertson County, dropped out of school at 16 to help her mother after her father's stroke, and married my grandfather, Gerald, at 19. Gerald Prater had worked the line at a manufacturing plant in Springfield for 31 years. He was not a wealthy man. He was a precise one. Gerald kept records of everything. Every payment. Every repair. Every loan he made to family members and every time one went unpaid. He had a green ledger he kept in the top drawer of his desk, and on the 1st of every month he sat down with a cup of black coffee and updated it. I know because I sat with him while he did it, every summer from the time I was 8 until I was 15, the summer he died. I was the only grandchild who came. My mother and her sister would drop us at Grandma and Grandpa's for a week each summer. My sister Bree and my cousin Kyle would last 2 days before they were bored and restless and calling their parents to come get them. I stayed. I helped Grandpa Gerald weed the garden and fix the screen door and drive fence posts. I sat at that desk with him while he did his accounting, asking questions about the numbers, and he answered every one of them. One afternoon, I was maybe 12, I asked him why he wrote everything down. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Because memory is kind, Callie. Paper isn't." I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. Gerald died when I was 15. He left the house on Stillwater Road to Eunice outright, and he left a handwritten note in the ledger that I didn't know about until much later. Grandma Eunice told me about it the year I turned 30. She said Gerald had written her a list of which grandchildren had sat with him and which ones hadn't. She didn't read me the whole thing. He didn't have to. After Gerald died, Grandma Eunice stayed in that house alone. She managed everything herself for a long time. She was resourceful and stubborn, and she didn't ask for help she didn't need. But as she got older and her knees got worse and the winters got harder to manage alone, things changed. My mother and Aunt Patricia would call every few weeks. They would visit at Thanksgiving and Christmas. They sent cards. I started going every 3rd weekend in 2017. 6 years of 3rd weekends. I drove the 3 hours each way without being asked. I fixed what needed fixing, drove her to appointments, sat with her through the episodes when her heart would do things it wasn't supposed to do. In 2020, when she had a minor procedure and needed someone to stay for a week afterward, I took vacation time from the care center and came. I didn't tell anyone I did it. It wasn't their business. I was a hospice nurse. I had chosen that work on purpose. Not because it was easy, but because I understood something specific about it. You cannot fake calm. When a patient is frightened and their breathing is becoming labored and the family is falling apart in the hallway, the nurse in the room has to be the steadiest person present. Not because she doesn't feel anything, but because she has learned that feelings are information, not instructions. You receive them. You do not perform them. You act on what is true and necessary. I had carried that understanding into every part of my life, including this one. I had started paying for Grandma's supplemental insurance premium in 2019. It was $214 a month, and I paid it by automatic transfer from my checking account because her fixed income had gotten tighter after Medicare adjustment and she hadn't said anything to anyone. I found out by accident looking through some paperwork with her one evening after dinner, and I set up the transfer the following Monday. I paid it for 4 years. $10,272 in total. Nobody in my family knew. I paid her property tax 1 year too in 2021, when she mentioned quietly that the county had sent a second notice. It was $1,340. I sent a check. He tried to pay me back. I told her I'd gotten a bonus at work, which wasn't entirely a lie. Bree, my sister, had received different things over the years. When Bree got married in 2015, Grandma Eunice gave her $8,000 toward the venue. When Bree had her first baby in 2018, Grandma gave her the antique bedroom set from the guest room, a piece worth at least $3,500 by any conservative estimate. When Bree's husband lost his job in 2020, Grandma transferred $6,500 to their account. Bree never mentioned any of this to me. I only know because I was there one afternoon when Grandma was going through her own records and showed me. She wasn't complaining. She was explaining. I wanted you to know, she said, because I want you to understand that I kept track. I didn't say anything. I set my hand over hers and let her talk. In the fall of 2020, Grandma Eunice asked me to drive her to see a lawyer in Hendersonville. She said she wanted to update some paperwork. She asked me to come inside with her. The attorney's name was Margaret Holloway, and her office smelled like old paper and lemon oil, and there was a framed cross-stitch on the wall that said, "Render unto none what is not theirs to take." I thought about that later. Eunice sat across from Margaret Holloway and told her exactly what she wanted. I sat in the chair beside her and did not speak unless spoken to. At the end of the appointment, Grandma signed several documents. Margaret Holloway placed them in a cream-colored envelope and sealed it and wrote Callie's name on the outside in black ink. She handed it to Eunice. Eunice put it in her purse. When we got back in the car, Grandma didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "That's handled." I started to ask her what exactly was handled. She patted my knee. "When the time comes," she said, "Margaret will explain it. You don't need to worry about it before then." I drove her home. I helped her with dinner. I left Sunday morning and drove back to Hendersonville and went to work Monday. The envelope existed. I had seen it. I did not know what was in it. I had put myself through nursing school on a $4,200 volunteer state scholarship and a second job bussing tables at a diner on Dickerson Pike from 11 at night until 3 in the morning, 4 nights a week for 2 years. My parents had offered nothing. Not because they couldn't. Roy was working steadily then and Dana had gone back to part-time bookkeeping. They offered nothing because they didn't think I'd finish. Dana said once when I was home for Christmas my sophomore year, that she admired my persistence. And the way she said the word made clear she thought persistence and delusion were the same thing. I finished in 3 years. I took my boards the following June. I passed the first time. Nobody came to my pinning ceremony. I didn't invite them. I drove myself, wore the white uniform I'd pressed the night before, and pinned the pin myself in the bathroom mirror. Then I went to work. I kept paying the $214 every month. When Dana called me 4 days after Grandma's funeral, to tell me about the family meeting she had arranged for the following morning, she did not mention the envelope. She said we needed to get ahead of the estate before things got complicated. She said there were some decisions that needed to be made as a family. She had said the same phrase, as a family, 4 times in 6 minutes. I counted. I'll be there, I told her. I didn't say anything else. That was the history. This is what happened the morning of the 6th day. I had driven back to Grandma's house the night before after Dana's call. I didn't sleep well. I lay on the narrow bed in the back bedroom, Grandma called it the sewing room, and looked at the ceiling and thought about Margaret Holloway's office. About the cross-stitch on the wall. About the cream-colored envelope in Grandma's purse. The morning of the meeting, Dana and Roy arrived at 9. Dana had a folder with her. An actual manila folder which she set on the kitchen table with a kind of deliberate authority, as if the folder itself established something. Roy poured himself coffee without asking. They had brought Bree, which I hadn't expected. Bree sat down across from me and didn't make eye contact. She was wearing a blouse I recognized from Grandma's closet. A blue cotton one with small white buttons that Eunice had worn to church. I looked at it for a moment. I didn't say anything. Dana opened the folder. She had printed several pages, which she arranged in front of herself. Then she slid the single-page release toward me. "We think it's cleanest this way," she said. "Eunice didn't leave a formal will and the estate is modest. We're proposing to divide the liquid assets between the 4 of us equally, and we'll arrange a private sale of the house." I looked at the release. "There's no will," Roy said. "We checked." I kept my hands flat on the table. "You're being greedy," Dana said. Her voice had gotten quieter, which with her was always more dangerous than loud. "This is your grandmother's home, Callie. This isn't about money. This is about what she would have wanted." I let that sit. Then I said, "I need a few days." "We've already waited 6 days," Dana said. "I know." I stood up. Carried my coffee to the sink. "I'll be in touch." That afternoon I called Margaret Holloway's office from the driveway of Grandma's house, sitting in my car with the windows up and the heat on. Her assistant answered. I gave my name. There was a pause and then Margaret Holloway herself came on the line, which told me something. "Callie," she said. "I was expecting to hear from you. I'm so sorry about your grandmother." "Thank you," I said. "I need to understand something." "Yes," she said. "I think you do. Can you come in Thursday?" Margaret Holloway's office was on the 2nd floor of a building on Main Street in Hendersonville, above a title company. The staircase smelled like old wood and carpet cleaner. Her waiting room had 2 chairs and a side table with a bowl of peppermints. The cross-stitch was still on the wall. I'd thought about it enough in the preceding days that seeing it again felt almost familiar. She came out to meet me herself. She was a small woman, 60 or so, with reading glasses on, a chain around her neck and a handshake that was brisk and dry. She led me into her office and closed the door. "Your grandmother was very clear," Margaret said. She sat down and opened a file folder on her desk. A different folder than the one she had used at our first meeting. This one was thicker. She came to see me in October of 2020 and again in March of 2022 to update the same documents. She was thorough. She was also, Margaret paused, very fond of you. I didn't say anything. My throat had tightened, which I noted and set aside. Margaret pulled a sealed cream-colored envelope from the folder and set it on the desk. My name was on the front in Grandma Eunice's handwriting. "This is a personal letter," Margaret said. She asked that it be given to you after her death, before any estate proceedings were initiated. We also have a notarized trust document that names you as sole beneficiary of her estate, including the house on Stillwater Road and the savings account currently holding $178,500. I heard the number. I kept my hands flat on my knees. "My parents believe there's no will," I said. "There isn't a will," Margaret said. "There's a trust. They are not the same instrument and your grandmother knew that. She chose a trust specifically so the estate would transfer without going through probate and without requiring family consensus." Margaret looked at me over her glasses. "No one can contest it. No one needs to sign anything. It is already done." I set my hand on the envelope on the desk. I didn't pick it up yet. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You don't sign anything your family presents to you," she said. "And you let me make a phone call." I nodded. She pulled the trust document from the folder, 12 pages, bound on the left side, and set it in front of me. I read every page. It took 20 minutes. Margaret sat across from me and waited without speaking, which I respected. When I was done I set it down. "Hey," I said. I'll reach out to your parents' representative if they have one. If they don't, I'll write them directly. She paused. Callie, your grandmother was quite specific about one thing. She didn't want this to be a surprise for you. She wanted you to know she had handled it. Her word, handled. I thought about sitting in the car in the parking lot of that office 3 years ago. That's handled. My jaw tightened. I held it. Thank you, I said. In the days that followed, I did 3 things. I drove back to the house on Stillwater Road and walked through every room. I wasn't ready to make decisions about any of it. I just needed to be in it. I stood in the kitchen where Grandpa Gerald had kept his ledger, and I stood in the sewing room where I hadn't slept well in 6 days, and I stood in the living room where Grandma Eunice's reading glasses were still folded on the side table next to her chair. I didn't move them. I called Margaret on a Thursday evening to confirm that she had sent the letter. She had. She read me Dana's response, which had been terse and had included the phrase, "We'll be exploring our options." Margaret said evenly that there were no options to explore. I thanked her and hung up. And I answered Dana's calls. There were 4 of them in 5 days, without arguing, without raising my voice, without giving her anything to work with. She said I was being selfish. I said I understood. She said Grandma would be disappointed. I waited until she was done. She said if I wouldn't cooperate, the family was going to hold a meeting and decide things without me. That's your right, I said. She hung up. If you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who drove the 3 hours, the one who sat in the waiting room, the one who paid the bill nobody knew about, and then been told that your presence didn't count for anything, this is your sign that it counted. Counted to the person who mattered most. If you have ever been handed a piece of paper and told it was just paperwork, when you knew in your body it was not just paperwork, this story is for you. Trust the thing in your body. If you have ever been the quiet one at the table while someone louder organized the room around her own assumptions, you will understand what it felt like to sit there and say nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, because I already knew how this ended. Dana called a family meeting for a Sunday afternoon. Bree, Roy, herself, and a cousin named Keith who owned a storage unit business and apparently had opinions about estate law. They held it at Bree's house. They did not invite me. They called it a family meeting. I noted the guest list. The night before that meeting, my phone rang at 9:47. It was my grandmother's oldest friend, a woman named Vera Hutchins who had lived 3 doors down from Eunice on Stillwater Road for 38 years. Vera was 81 and still drove herself to church. She had been at the funeral and had pressed my hand at the reception and not said much, which was unlike her. "I've been meaning to call," she said. "I'm glad you did," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother talked about you constantly, you know. Not in a braggy way. Just the way people talk about someone who actually showed up." I didn't say anything. "She told me once," Vera said, "about something Gerald used to say. Something about paper." I went still. She said he told her, "Memory is kind. Paper isn't." And she said she finally understood what he meant. Vera paused. "She said you'd understand too." I sat on the edge of the sewing room bed in the dark. "She also wanted me to tell you something if the time ever came," Vera said. "She made me promise." She said, "Tell Callie she doesn't owe them an explanation. The paper speaks for itself." My eyes went hot. I blinked. "Hey," I said. Very quiet. "She loved you more than she knew how to say out loud," Vera said. "But she said it on paper. That's what counts." I set the phone down after we hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. The house was quiet. Grandma Eunice's reading glasses were still on the table in the next room. I didn't feel the need to say anything out loud. I felt the thing that settles. Not certainty, I already had that. Something quieter. Permission. A baton handed across. Tomorrow I would go to the meeting they hadn't invited me to. Margaret Holloway would be with me. The letter was in my bag. I woke before the alarm. The sewing room was cold and the light through the curtain was the flat gray of early November. I lay still for a moment and listened to the house. Then I got up. I showered and dressed in the clothes I had laid out the night before. Dark slacks, a cream-colored blouse, my good flat shoes. I had chosen them deliberately. Not to impress anyone. Because they were the clothes I wore to work when I sat with families in the first hours after a death. When my job was to be the clearest, calmest person in the room, and to let the facts be what they were. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and drank it. The folder was on the table. Inside it, A copy of the trust document that Margaret Holloway had given me, the pages bound on the left side. And underneath it, the cream-colored envelope with my name in Grandma Eunice's handwriting. I had not opened it yet. Margaret had said I could open it whenever I was ready. I had decided I would open it there, in front of them. I checked the folder twice. I checked the clasp on my bag. I checked my phone for a message from Margaret confirming she would meet me at Bree's house at 1 o'clock. The message was there. I washed my coffee mug and set it in the rack to dry. I turned off the kitchen light. I locked Grandma's door behind me. The drive from Stillwater Road to Bree's subdivision took 22 minutes. I took the county road instead of the highway because I needed the slower pace of it. The bare fields, the fence lines, the sky that was white all the way to the edges. The radio came on when I started the car and I turned it off. I didn't need anything in my ears. I needed the quiet. I parked on the street in front of Bree's house at 12:51. Margaret's gray sedan was already there. I sat in my car for 2 minutes. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted to arrive after I was ready, not before. The air outside was cold and smelled like dead leaves and chimney smoke. I picked up my bag from the passenger seat. I got out of the car. Inside, they were already seated at Bree's dining room table. Dana at the head. Roy beside her. Bree across from an empty chair. Cousin Keith at the far end with a legal pad in front of him, which told me everything I needed to know about his role. There were printed pages spread across the table. There was a pitcher of water nobody had touched. The room smelled like candle wax and something baked. Bree had put out a plate of cookies, which struck me as the saddest thing in the room. Dana saw me come in. Then she saw Margaret behind me. Her expression shifted. A small tightening around the eyes that she smoothed back into neutrality almost immediately. She was good at that. "Callie," she said. "I didn't realize you were bringing someone." I set my bag on the chair beside me and sat down. Margaret sat to my left and placed her briefcase on the floor without opening it. "This is Margaret Holloway," I said. She was Grandma Eunice's attorney. Nobody said anything. Keith put his pen down. I read the room. Dana had staged this carefully. The printed documents, the legal pad, the cookies, the pitcher. The whole tableau designed to communicate organization and reasonableness, to make the signing feel like a formality rather than a transfer. She had expected me to come alone, possibly uncertain, possibly movable. I was none of those things. The dining room at Bree's house was the kind of room that had been recently cleaned for company. The table had been wiped down and the chairs pushed in. There were place settings. Not plates, but the implication of them, cloth napkins folded into rectangles. The overhead light was on even though it was the middle of the afternoon, which gave the room a slightly formal quality that Bree had probably intended. Keith's legal pad was open to a blank page with a heading written at the top that I caught a partial glimpse of before he shifted it. The heading said estate, distribution. He had drawn a line underneath it. He had not written anything below the line yet. Dana had her folder. She had her printed documents. She had positioned herself at the head of the table in a chair that was slightly taller than the others because it had a cushion, Bree's chair by habit, which gave her a few inches of implicit authority over the room. He had thought about this. I noticed it and noted it. Roy had arrived before me. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, which meant he had been there long enough to be served. He looked tired. He also looked like a man who had decided to agree with whatever was decided, which was the same posture he had held for 40 years. Bree had set out the cookies on a small plate near the center of the table. They were the kind from a tube that you slice and bake. She had pressed a thumbprint into a few of them before cooking to give them a small depression, and she had put a red candy in each one. The red candies had mostly melted and pooled. Nobody was eating them. I understood what the room was. I had sat in rooms like this. Rooms organized around a predetermined outcome, staged to make resistance feel like disruption. I had sat in those rooms as a nurse, when a family had already decided what they believed about a patient's prognosis and arranged the chairs to confirm it, and my job had been to say the true thing quietly and then wait. I sat down. I set my bag on the chair beside me. I placed my hands in my lap. I was not disrupting anything. I was arriving with the actual documents. I let her have a moment with the room she had built. Subscribe to this channel, because what happens next is the part one most want you to see. Dana had clearly prepared remarks. She set both hands flat on the table and looked around at each person before she spoke, including me, making deliberate eye contact the way people do when they want the room to feel like consensus. Then she took a breath. I want to start by saying that we are all here because we loved Eunice, she said. Her voice was measured, practiced. And I think if we approach this the way she would have wanted, as a family with honesty without lawyers making it adversarial, we can get this resolved today in a way that honors her. She paused to let that land. Mom didn't leave a formal will. We've confirmed that with the county. That means the estate goes into intestate succession, which, in Tennessee, is distributed among her surviving children, meaning me and Patricia, and divided accordingly. The house on Stillwater Road would need to be sold, and the savings account would be split between the two branches of the family. She looked at me. Callie, you're family, and we want to make sure you feel included in this. Which is why we've proposed a supplemental distribution, a gesture of goodwill, of $10,000 from the family account, in addition to your portion of the personal property. She said it warmly. She said it as if she were offering me something. Roy nodded beside her. Keith wrote something on his legal pad. Bree looked at the cookies. Dana slid the release document across the table toward me. It was a fresh copy, the same single page, the same printed name at the bottom. We just need your signature, she said. And we can all move forward. She folded her hands and waited. The room was very still. I didn't reach for the document. I let the silence that followed settle all the way down, until it had filled every corner of the room and every person at the table had finished deciding whether to speak and had decided not to. Keith set his pen down. Roy cleared his throat once and then did not speak. Bree's hands were in her lap. I waited. I set my hand on the table flat. I reached down and picked up my bag. I set it on my lap and opened the clasp. No hurry. I took a breath and let it out. I looked at Dana. You said there was no will, I said. You were right. There wasn't. I let that sit for one beat. There was a trust. Dana's eyes went still. You said Grandma would have wanted it clean, I said. She agreed. That's why she handled it 3 years ago. I reached into my bag. I took out the cream-colored envelope. Grandma Eunice's handwriting on the front. My name in blue ink in her careful cursive. I held it for a moment. Then I took out the trust document beneath it, the 12 pages bound on the left side. I unfolded the clasp of the envelope slowly, one careful pull, and I removed the letter inside. 2 pages handwritten, the same blue ink. I placed the letter on the table in front of me. Then I unfolded the trust document page by page until it was flat on the table, headers facing the room. I laid them both flat and smoothed the edge with one hand. The top line of the trust document read, Irrevocable Living Trust of Eunice Margaret Prater, Sole Beneficiary, Caroline Ruth Prater. I did not say anything. I let them read it. Dana's face went gray. It happened in stages. The color drained from her cheeks first, then her jaw went tight, then her hands, which had been folded on the table, separated and went flat, palms down, as if she needed to steady herself against something. Roy made a sound that was not a word. He sat back in his chair slowly, the way a person sits when their legs have stopped working correctly. Keith's pen had rolled to the edge of the legal pad. He did not pick it up. Bree looked at the trust document. Then she looked at me. Her expression was not angry. It was something I hadn't expected. Recognition. Like someone watching a thing arrive that they had privately known was coming. The pitcher of water sat untouched. Nobody moved to pour anything. Dana said very quietly, That can't be right. Margaret spoke for the first time. Her voice was even and unhurried. The trust was executed in October of 2020 and amended in March of 2022. It is an irrevocable instrument. Eunice was represented by counsel at both signings, and her capacity was fully documented. The estate, including the residence on Stillwater Road and the savings account currently holding $178,500, transferred to Caroline Prater at the moment of Eunice Prater's death. There is nothing to contest and no proceeding required. Roy's hands were shaking slightly. I noticed and looked away. Dana said, She never told us. No, I said. She didn't. I looked at her. Kept my voice even. She also never told you about the $214 a month I paid for her supplemental insurance for 4 years. Or the property tax in 2021. I set my hands flat on the table. She kept records. She was Gerald's wife. She knew how. Keith looked up from the legal pad. His voice was careful. Is the irrevocable trust, is there any basis to challenge it? Capacity, undue influence, that kind of thing. No, Margaret said. Both signings were documented by a licensed attorney and a notary. Eunice Prater had full legal capacity at both appointments. Undue influence would require evidence that someone pressured her in a way that overcame her will. There is no such evidence, and the record shows she initiated this process independently. She paused. There is no legal basis for a challenge. Keith set his pen down. He did not write anything else. Roy looked at me. His voice had gone quiet in a way I recognized. Not the quiet of restraint, but the quiet of recalculation. When was this drafted? October 2020, Margaret said. With an amendment in March 2022. You knew about this, Roy said. I knew she went to a lawyer, I said. I drove her there. I didn't know the contents until last week. He nodded slowly. He was not angry. He looked, if I'm being honest, like a man assembling a sequence of events in order and finding that they made a kind of sense he hadn't expected. Dana had not moved. Her hands were still flat on the table. Her face had moved through gray and had arrived at something harder. Not rage, not grief, but the particular expression of someone who has built a structure and is watching it come down one beam at a time and cannot stop it and knows it. She should have told us, Dana said. She made a legal decision about her own property, Margaret said evenly. She was not required to disclose it. She was my mother. Yes, I said. I kept my voice quiet. She was. She was also a person who kept her own records and made her own choices. She learned that from Gerald. Bree looked up at me when I said that. Something moved in her face. Something that was not, for once, the performance of family solidarity. She looked at the trust document on the table. She looked at me. She said nothing. But she did not look away. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I reached for my bag. I picked up the letter. I folded it once and placed it back in the envelope and set it in my bag. The trust document I left on the table. I stood up. I'm not going to sign the release, I said. I'm also not going to make this harder than it needs to be. Margaret will be in touch about next steps. I pushed my chair in. I picked up my bag. I looked at my mother once, not with anger, not with satisfaction. Just looked at her the way I look at a patient's family when I've said the true thing and there is nothing left to add. Then I walked out of Bree's dining room through the front hallway and out the door. Margaret followed 3 minutes later. I was standing beside my car in the cold when she came out. She had her briefcase. She closed the front door behind her without looking back. Keith left before I did, she said. I nodded. Your mother didn't say anything after you walked out. She sat there. Margaret paused. Your sister picked up the trust document and read the first page. She set it back down and said, and I'm quoting, I figured. I didn't say anything. Margaret unlocked her car. I'll send you the file transfer timeline by Friday. The savings account releases in approximately 10 business days. You'll want to think about the house. I know, I said. Callie. She looked at me over the roof of her car. Your grandmother was very clear about what she wanted. She was clear for a long time. Don't let anybody reframe that as something she did to them. She did it for you. I set my hand on the roof of my own car and let the cold metal sit under my palm for a moment. I know, I said again. I drove back to Stillwater Road. I unlocked Grandma's door. I went inside and sat in her chair, her reading chair by the window, and I opened the letter and read it for the first time. It was 2 pages. Her handwriting was careful and slow and I could feel how long each sentence had taken her. She told me about the day she and Gerald had come home from the hospital after losing their first baby, before any of us were born, and how she had sat in that same chair and he had sat on the floor beside her and held her hand without speaking. She told me she had thought about that afternoon many times over the years, whenever she needed to remember what it felt like when someone stayed. She said, you stayed, Callie. Every 3rd weekend for 6 years. You stayed. Gerald would have wanted you to have this. I want you to have this. The paper says what I could not always say out loud. I sat in her chair in the quiet house and I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully along the original creases and put it back in the envelope and held it in my lap for a while. My mother had said, you're being greedy. I thought about that word for a long time afterward. Greedy. I had paid $10,272 in insurance premiums over 4 years without telling anyone. I had driven 3 hours in the dark the night Grandma was dying because nobody else came. I had sat with her attorney at a table in an office on Main Street and held my hands still while the paperwork was signed, and then I had kept paying the $214 every month without saying a word. If that was greed, I didn't know what the word meant. She had said, "Family takes care of family." I thought about that one too. I thought about it in October, every October when I transferred the property tax payment from my checking account, and when I arranged the prescription delivery because Grandma's pharmacy had changed their pickup hours and she didn't drive after dark anymore. Family takes care of family. I had understood that sentence differently than she did. She had said, Eunice would have wanted it clean. He was right. Eunice had wanted it clean. That was why she had gone to Margaret Holloway's office in October of 2020 and signed 12 pages and asked that a letter be written in blue ink and sealed in an envelope and held until the time came. Clean. Handled. Done. Dana did not call me for 3 weeks. When she did, I let it go to voicemail. The message said she wanted to talk, that she hoped we could find a way through this as a family. I saved the message and did not return the call. I kept working my shifts. The transfer came through on a Friday. The house on Stillwater Road was mine. I drove out there the following Saturday and walked through every room again, and this time I wasn't saying goodbye to anything. I was arriving. The people who call you greedy for protecting what you built are only ever telling you how much they plan to take. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who drove the distance, signed nothing, said little, and kept going back anyway, let this be your sign that the staying was seen. It was recorded. And paper doesn't forget. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs it.